Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here. And I loved Dr. Kowalski's talk as well. I'm Lindsay. That was a wonderful intro, so I won't add any more to that, except that I'm just so grateful to work with so many of the other incredible practitioners who you've gotten to be inspired by and learn from today. And I'm excited to talk to you about food. I actually wanted to start by just asking how many of you feel that what or how you eat impacts your headaches or, other migraine symptoms. And I would love it if you could just drop it in the chat if you're someone who feels like food, impacts how you feel. Um, yes, a couple of yeses. Okay. Yep. Um, and then, I'm also wondering how many of you find that your migraine attacks impact your food choices so that you get cravings before or weird cravings after or have trouble eating during. Okay, so yeah, we're getting some affirmatives there as well. So food can be such a powerful tool for people living with chronic migraine, and it can also be such a complex relationship, right? So, what we crave can signal the start of a migraine, and what or how we eat can prevent or trigger one. When we're in pain, food can be so comforting for some, and for others, eating and staying hydrated becomes nearly impossible. So I heard that a few people said, that eating is hard and staying hydrating is so key. I'm seeing some different cravings, smells. So in this complicated relationship, unlike some others in our lives, it's not optional, right? We have to eat. So we also owe it to ourselves to figure out how we can feel the best that we possibly can in the context of our overall health and our migraines. So there's little doubt that what and how we eat impacts our physical and mental health and can impact the severity, frequency, and duration of headaches. And food is rarely the only factor influencing migraines, which are complex and multivariant condition. So I thought I would just start by sharing with you a little bit of sort of a framework or an analogy that I use in my practice when I'm helping people think through their diet and lifestyle changes. So I like to think of a person's headache threshold as a bucket. And in that bucket goes all of your triggers, right? Diet or non diet related. Some of these triggers we can modify or change. So, hydration, blood sugar levels to a certain extent, alcohol, food triggers. These are things we have some control over, right? Some of them we have less control over. So we may not be able to control bright lights. We could get glasses, but the fact that we have bright lights or flashing lights, we can't necessarily control. We can't always control strong smells. We certainly can't control pressure changes or what our hormones are doing. And so you can see how this becomes such a complicated landscape, particularly when we're talking about trying to identify those triggers and especially food triggers. Because, for example, for many women, hormones are a trigger, not for everyone, but for many women. And so, if hormones are a major filler of your bucket during a time when your bucket is almost always filled with hormone triggers, something that is a minor trigger, maybe a food trigger is a minor trigger, may just be that last drop in the bucket that fills you over, right? Whereas maybe another time of the month when you don't have that hormone trigger, you can get away with eating that food all day long and it's never going to be enough to fill your bucket. So that I think makes the definitive sort of identification of these different triggers a really tricky thing. And then we have, you may notice at the bottom, these nice valves in our bucket. So these are things that we can use to sort of increase our migraine threshold or continually kind of give us a little bit more space in that bucket. So these are things like hydration, maybe some of those exercises, that Matt was talking about. Eating a low glycemic anti-inflammatory diet, getting enough sleep, supplements and medications can fall into this category. Regular gentle movement can all give us that increased capacity that's going to allow more triggers to come in without overflowing that bucket. So I sort of think about these two main strategies. We can either focus on increasing our headache threshold by trying to keep the body in homeostasis, regularly attending to self care and nourishment practices that help to keep our body, brain, and blood sugar levels balanced. I would also put things like medication, supplements, body work, exercise, all those things go in this increase the headache threshold bucket. And then we can also look at decreasing triggers to the extent that we can modify those, right? So we can lower the things that are actually going into that bucket. So I just highlighted here some of the sort of modifiable things that we can think about when we're talking about diet and lifestyle, both from a trigger perspective and from a threshold perspective. So, not all people with migraine will find triggers in the foods that they eat, but everyone can benefit from making healthier food choices. So, whereas you may not have food as a primary filler of your bucket, everyone can increase sort of the strength of the spigots that they have at the bottom of their bucket, which can increase resilience and decrease the chance that you're going to get headaches or migraines as frequently and as severely. So, in terms of diet strategies, the baseline advice that I usually work with is to follow an anti inflammatory, low glycemic, whole food based diet. There's a lot of variation here, right? So, an anti inflammatory diet can look plant based, it can even look paleo. I mean, there's a broad range of dietary patterns that we can follow. And we'll talk a little bit more about the key elements that an anti inflammatory diet has to have. But this does not look the same for every person. There's also individuality in terms of figuring out whether you have specific food sensitivities or things that may be causing more inflammation in your particular body. And then, from a trigger perspective, we can look at elimination diets targeted at reducing common food triggers. So, the goal here is really to identify and reduce triggers, thereby filling your bucket less quickly, right? Um, for those who have significant dietary triggers, this can be a total game changer. But not everyone has significant triggers. And frankly, the diet itself can cause increased stress, which is also a trigger, right? So, often, I advise starting with sort of looking at increasing your threshold. And then once we know that you're regularly following these habits and strategies of sort of general healthy eating and eating pattern, then we can look at whether it's appropriate to layer in an elimination diet. This is sort of brain food. I want to start actually by talking about balanced blood sugar because I think this is a really key piece for a lot of people. So, there was an interesting randomized control trial looking at 350 migraineurs without aura, and these were people who had not tried medications before. So, half of the group was put on a high fiber, low glycemic index diet. So, this is a diet that's designed to not raise your blood sugar levels excessively to keep you in a nice, even zone of blood sugar. And then the other group had medication. So after a month, the frequency of attacks was significantly reduced in both the diet and the pharmacological group, which is awesome, right? So fewer attacks all around. And then after 3 months in the diet group, the severity was also reduced. So the drugs worked a little quicker in this study. So people had the severity of their attacks was reduced at 30 days in the drug group and not until 90 days in the diet group. But for people who hung in there, diet ultimately reduced both frequency and severity of the attacks. And people were making diet changes that are also beneficial for overall health and longevity, right? Also, the beautiful thing is we don't have to choose diet or medications, right? Ideally, we're combining both and we're finding things that really help to compound these effects in lowering your reactivity. So I'm going to back it up just a tiny bit and just give a quick overview of what I'm even talking about when I talk about blood sugar. So all carbohydrates, be they grains, vegetables, fruits, beans, or bread, pastries, soda, desserts, are going to turn into glucose or blood sugar. Um, and that is the primary fuel for our brain, our muscles, and energy production in our body. Glucose is what our body predominantly and preferentially runs on. If we have a little too much, it gets stored in our muscle and liver as a storage form of glycogen, and then extra beyond that gets stored as fat. This is what our body really is designed to run on, and all of our cells, particularly those in our brain, require a steady supply of glucose at all times. So large fluctuations here affect the brain more than any other organ and can lead to headaches, even independent of migraine disorders, right? So everybody can get headaches from low blood sugar, but this can be particularly triggering and put you in a much more vulnerable position if you're already someone who has a lower threshold. So if we look at this in practice, let's just say I was running super late this morning and I grabbed a muffin from my local coffee shop takeout window, right? Maybe I'm not going in right now. And that breaks down very quickly into blood glucose. It was made from white flour, there was some sugar, maybe there were a few blueberries. My blood sugar shoots up. My pancreas is like, holy cow, all this sugar's in my blood. I need to get it into the cells where the body needs it. So it secretes a bunch of insulin. And then my blood sugar levels are brought down really quickly because that glucose is shuttled into my cells. Unfortunately, this happens in an exaggerated way. So the rise is exaggerated and the fall is also exaggerated. And when we're in those valleys, we are very vulnerable. So I'm sure all of you can recognize this feeling of sort of at some point in your life, really feeling hangry, feeling a little dizzy, maybe feeling tired. That sort of like mid afternoon slump is often when this happens for people. That is a vulnerable place, and one that we want to try to avoid whenever possible. So, low blood sugar, hands are your agenda for the day, top item, headache, right? So, how do we get to balanced blood sugar? So, one thing that we are going to do, oh, I see that someone asked for cookbooks that I love, and I have my whole bookshelf here, so I'll show you some at the end of the talk, Jen. So, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to swap those fast breakdown carbs for slower ones. So, what do I mean here? So slower carbs are going to be predominantly whole plant foods, beans, legumes, whole fruits and vegetables, minimally processed whole grains. I would put, whole grain bread in this category as well. That's going to break down a little bit more quickly because it has more surface area, but that still goes into more of the slow carb category. And you could even put maybe pasta that's cooked al dente. So, you can have other things in this category, but this is sort of what we're thinking. Faster carbs are going to be our white foods. Potatoes are on here, but really potatoes aren't not so bad if you're eating them with the skin. So, not all white foods go on necessarily the bad list. Sweets, fruit juices, some energy bars end up unfortunately being really fast carbs, and definitely most of the sort of baked good pastry category. So the second strategy is to combine our carbs with protein and healthy fats. So let's just say you're in a position where you are not in a million years going to start eating brown rice. And you're like, pry my bagel out of my cold dead hands. Cool. So in that case, you're picking a sort of a faster carb to begin with. So my advice there is to make sure that the portion of that carbohydrate is moderate. So maybe it's like the size of your fist, which obviously is scaled to the size of our bodies, right? And then you really want to combine that carbohydrate with protein and healthy fat. So adding these two other elements is going to really dramatically slow the release of sugar into your bloodstream. And it's going to lower what's called the glycemic load of the meal. So this is something that I really help people strategize around. We will go through and look at sort of breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and think about, what is missing here? Are you ending up just having a big carbohydrate load at breakfast, and you don't have that protein or healthy fat to really help to slow and lower the glycemic load of the whole meal. Breakfast I mentioned, and that's actually a particularly important one in terms of setting you up for stable blood sugar levels throughout the day. So making sure that you get some protein at breakfast, and for most people that you're eating breakfast. I know that intermittent fasting is a thing right now, that everyone's really interested in experimenting with. My experience has been that for a lot of people, it is not the best strategy. And there actually was just some really interesting research that showed that eating breakfast actually led to lower blood sugar levels, more stable blood sugar throughout the day than doing an intermittent fast where you're sort of skipping breakfast and trying to go until lunch, which is not what some of the research on intermittent fasting previously had suggested. So I do think that for most people, eating breakfast is good advice. And everyone can experiment, and see what works best for them. So, eating regularly and snacking strategically. So, for most people, eating every 3 to 5 at the absolute outside limit hours during the day is going to help keep those blood sugar levels balanced throughout the day. So sometimes people can make it from breakfast to lunch, no problem. For most people, that lunch to dinner window is a big chunk of time that if you don't put a strategic afternoon snack in there, you're trying to make your body go 7 hours or something like that without a meal. And that's going to put you in a vulnerable situation. So, one thing that I think can be sort of interesting to do is if you notice that you're having an afternoon headache pretty frequently, or even if you're noticing just that energy slump or mood crash sort of in the middle of your afternoon. Sorry, I have a cat visitor who I'm just going to put on the floor. The joy of Zoom presentations. Um, you can take note of that. So, just track how that's happening for about a week, and then you can plan a snack for 10 to 20 minutes before that energy drop usually hits. So let's just say that's happening at 4 o'clock every day for you. Then a good time to have a snack would be like between 3:30 and 3:45, right? Some of us have no problem tuning in to our hunger cues around this, but for a lot of us who are working through the afternoon, we get busy, we're not necessarily in a place where we're tuning into what are called our interoceptive senses. So that's the senses that are telling you, like, oh, my tummy's rumbling a little bit, or gosh, I'm getting a little lightheaded. It's easy to blow right through that. So, what should this snack be? This ideally is going to actually look like a little mini meal that combines just the things we were talking about, right? Those healthy, complex carbohydrates, some protein, and healthy fat. So, protein and fat conveniently often come packaged together in snacks. So, anytime you have a nut or seed butter, hummus, cheese, a hard boiled egg, all of these things, yogurt, these things are all going to have some protein and fat together. And then your healthy carbs can come from fruit or vegetables, starchy vegetables, whole grains, beans, whole grain crackers. You can always add vegetables, to any snack. That's always going to be a benefit. So here's my little kind of cheat sheet, right? You kind of take something from the left column, be that your veggies or your whole grain cracker, or your rice cake or your low sugar granola, and then you're going to combine it with something in this right category. Beans are sort of cool because they actually have carbohydrates and protein all together. So a little bean salad can actually be a really nice snack, and you don't have to do that much to it. Maybe you add a little drizzle of olive oil, and some lemon and some herbs to flavor it up, but you don't have to worry so much about the combining in that case. Bars also can be okay in a pinch. I just tell people, really look, if that's a case where looking at the label is really important. So you want sort of few ingredients, ideally less than 10 grams of sugar and at least 4 grams of fiber and 10 grams of protein. Some that I will often use are like macro bars and RX bars can be reasonable choices in a pinch. Kind bars can be decent. So, just to review, we're going to choose those slower carbs to begin with whenever possible. We're going to combine our carbohydrates with protein and fat to lower the glycemic load and blood sugar response. And then we're going to look at our eating pattern. So it may help to add a mid-morning or mid-afternoon snack. In general, we're not going more than sort of 3 to 4 hours without eating. And we're going to start our day with protein. The fiber is going to happen when you choose those slower carbs. So you probably won't have to work too hard for that. So that was actually a good lead into what an anti-inflammatory diet overall looks like. And my biggest thing to emphasize here is that the more we can pick real food, the better. So particularly for anyone with migraine disease, so many of the things that get added in to packaged and processed foods can be either mild or big triggers for people. And so you kind of get a twofer here. So not only are you eating in a nutrient dense way that's going to lower inflammation in your body, but you're also sort of by default avoiding a lot of these chemicals that can be triggering. So I love this picture. So we want to eat a rainbow, but Skittles don't count, right? So we're really adding as many of those colorful fruits and vegetables as possible. And we're also going to focus on healthy fats. So our brain really relies on fat, adequate amounts. So between 20 and 40% of the calories in your diet should be healthy fats. And in a Mediterranean style diet, which is often looked at as an anti-inflammatory diet in the research, that number is more like 40%. The quality of the fats is important, right? So I'm not talking about hydrogenated oils. Usually we're keeping saturated fats to about 10% of your total calories from fat. Um, but this is not something that I think that you need to be calculating. You're really just incorporating small amounts of these healthy fats in your meals and snacks. So, in the morning, if you're having oatmeal or a smoothie, maybe you are adding some hemp seeds or some walnuts to that, right? Midday, if you're having a salad, you are not skipping the dressing. You're having some olive oil and maybe you're adding avocado and some nuts or seeds to that. Um, in the evening, maybe you're having some salmon, or again, you're sort of dressing your vegetables with olive oil, or adding nuts and seeds as a garnish. And then these can be great workhorses in your snacking, in your strategic snacking. So then we're going to get enough high quality plant and animal proteins, and a mix of both is great. And then anti-inflammatory herbs and spices. So this is kind of in general what that anti-inflammatory Mediterranean style pyramid looks like. The one caveat here is I would say, obviously, not for everyone does red wine work, right? That can be a really powerful trigger. So that may not be in your anti-inflammatory diet pyramid, but it's not for everybody. So it's something that you kind of have to know your body about. And I also really love the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate. This does a really nice job. And essentially, if you tune in, what you'll see is that 75% of this plate is plants, right? So between our fruits, our vegetables, and our whole grains, we have a lot of our plate is plants. And then depending on your protein, that's either sort of plant or animal. We also have our healthy fats there and our water. We're staying hydrated, which is such a huge thing. I just saw that Bruce asked how many grams of protein we should have in each day. So, Bruce, that really depends on you, how big you are, and how many calories you're taking in. A general rule of thumb is just for basic nutrition, you're going to have 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. You may end up having more than that because you may end up having more calories than that, but that's just sort of a rough calculation. What I kind of think about is for most people, if you're thinking about having sort of 15 or 20 grams of protein at breakfast, same thing at lunch, same thing at dinner, most people are going to easily meet their protein needs. And you're going to have enough protein in each of those meals and snacks to really help balance your blood sugar levels. I hope that's helpful. Um, so we're increasing colorful plant foods as a primary strategy, I think. So we're asking sort of how can I add color to my diet? Could I add a piece of fruit to what I'm currently eating? What vegetables do I love? Some of my strategies are smoothies. So I think it's a sad day when you don't put a vegetable in your smoothie. These are things that I teach in the migraine group that we do. We do demos, and I typically make a green smoothie. And I will tell you, even for people with small children and picky eaters, frozen riced cauliflower, you will never know it's there. So that is a really easy vegetable that you can sneak right into a smoothie. It adds creaminess. It does not add flavor. So that's a great one. Having a salad in the day, if your digestion permits it, is another really great way to just get a bunch of colorful fruits and vegetables in one sitting. Do I recommend spirulina? I think spirulina is great. I think that anything green that has that like awesome chlorophyll component can be a great add-in. And I think what's important really is getting your basics in your smoothie first. So you want to ask, where's my protein coming from? Is it coming from my milk? Is it coming from nuts or seeds? Is it coming from yogurt? Um, is it coming from maybe some silken tofu? That there are a bunch of different options that you can kind of get your protein. You're going to have your liquid, obviously. Sometimes coconut water is a nice one for hydration. You're probably going to have some fruit to sweeten it up. And then you're going to have your vegetable. Then you can play, right? You can add some flax seeds for healthy fat. You can add some spirulina. You could add another green powder. You could add other sort of fun superfoods. But you want to make sure that you have those basics there so that that smoothie ends up being that balanced meal or snack that we were talking about. So I'm going to kind of quickly go, oh, Crohn's disease and on a low fiber diet. I actually also have Crohn's disease. So I'm very sympathetic to that cause. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to put my email in at the end of the presentation, Meredith, and maybe email me because there are definitely strategies. And I'm not sure that I'm going to have time to go into all of them right now. But there are safer fibers that we can play with in that case.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So supplements are another thing that can help to add an extra spigot, right? Or just give you a little bit of extra resilience. And they do not work for everyone. So these are things that I think in general it's safe to try. I often start people with magnesium. This can be particularly helpful for migraines related to sort of hormones around the time of menstruation and for kiddos. And the typical dose is 600 milligrams a day. Now, what I would say is that the form of magnesium is really important. So if you're someone who struggles with constipation, then magnesium citrate would be awesome for you because it's actually going to give you a little bit of a laxative effect. If you are not really looking for a laxative effect in your magnesium, which magnesium can have, then you might want to go with something more like magnesium glycinate, which is better absorbed overall and is not going to have as much of that laxative effect. Sometimes people need to start a little bit more slowly with magnesium and work their way up to avoid any GI side effects. And we can always play with the type of magnesium to get one that you can get to the optimal dose comfortably. CoQ10 is another one. Riboflavin helps to, which is vitamin B2, helps to balance energy production in the cells. If you notice, I tried to put in the average sort of time to take effect from some of the studies that have been done. So riboflavin, it was sort of 3 months, right? So this isn't something that you're necessarily going to notice a right away change in. So I think it's a good idea when you're talking about any food or diet change to think about, okay, I'm committing to this for, between 1 and 3 months to see what I notice. And often doing some sort of migraine frequency and severity logging during this time, anytime you're trying something new, can be a really helpful strategy. Ginger is one of my favorites. There have been a couple of trials looking at ginger as an abortive, going against, head to head against sort of migraine abortive treatments. And so, and it's super safe to try. So you can try between 250 and 400 milligrams at your first signs of a headache if you want to take a ginger pill. The other thing you can do is just make some really stiff ginger tea. So I really like these. Like I always keep this turmeric active, which has ginger, and 3 ginger. These are two that I keep in my kind of medicine cabinet. Um, or throwing raw ginger into a smoothie, right? So let's just say you're having a little bit of a sweet craving, maybe your blood sugar's a little low, and you suspect maybe a headache's coming on. That might be a time to do, like a really well balanced smoothie with that's pretty strong in ginger. We also know that ginger can help with nausea, which is often goes along with some people's migraines. So all in all, that's a winner that I think everyone should try. Butterbur and feverfew, I use a little bit less commonly, but do have some trials showing. And then there are some combination products. So sometimes it's easier for people to try something where these are being kind of thrown together. You're taking fewer pills. And usually, again, I would recommend doing this for between 1 and 3 months to see if you notice a difference. The downside with a combination product is you don't really know what the thing is that's working, so it's a little bit harder to stop. On the other hand, if you find that it makes a significant impact, maybe you don't care that much because you're really just taking one supplement in your day. So now when we think about food triggers, these, as I said, can vary dramatically from person to person. Often, these are not specific foods, but are actually byproducts of food aging or foods with chemicals that are similar to the neurotransmitters in our brains. So these are a little bit different from a food allergy or a sensitivity because we're not necessarily talking about an immune response to a food, like an inflammatory response. We're talking about a food that contains a chemical that is irritating to our brain for some reason. You can see though how this being the case for some subset of triggers for people, it can be particularly tricky to identify a specific food because it may be, again, that you can get away with having small amounts of any of these foods, but that if you're stacking them in any given day, that could exceed your threshold or your tolerance. So, commonly reported migraine triggers, I'm sure I don't even need to repeat these for most of you, but these sort of are largely those chemicals and byproducts that I was talking about. That's what we see in a lot of these triggers that are listed as common triggers. A diet that a lot of people try as sort of a big comprehensive migraine elimination diet is the Heal Your Headache diet, or the Hopkins diet. This really tries to take out all of the common migraine triggers in one fell swoop with the intention of just lowering any possible trigger that you might have that's sort of helping to fill your bucket. Other things that people try, a low tyramine diet. There's some overlap there with the Heal Your Headache diet, a low histamine diet. There has been a little bit of research looking at ketogenic diets, although this isn't one that I recommend for people long term. And then there are elimination diets that are targeted more at determining whether you may have specific food sensitivities, i.e., whether you may have foods that are actually causing a mild immune reaction, immune inflammatory reaction in your body. So this could be looking at gluten or dairy. Yeah, so Louise, great question. That's exactly what I'm talking about now. So gluten or dairy tend to be foods that for some people can cause this immunologic inflammatory reaction. And so that can be enough to sort of raise that inflammation threshold and become a trigger for you. So it's a slightly different mechanism than the case of like a tyramine or an MSG, but it can have profound effects for people if that is the primary cause of their inflammation. In a more comprehensive elimination diet, you're going to look at taking away all major common allergy foods. So this is like soy and corn and eggs and gluten and dairy and sort of the full gamut. But it's a very different list than the Heal Your Headache style approach. So before I go to that next slide, what I want to say about elimination diets is that I think that ideally you are really working with an experienced practitioner when you tackle one of these. What I see a lot in my practice is that people try elimination diets. Um, well, there are subsets, right? Some people try them and they feel so much better that it's just undeniable to them, right? That this is having a profound effect. And that's amazing. And still, they would like to have more flexibility in their diet. So then we work together to try to figure out like what are the primary triggers and how much can they tolerate of each of these foods. But I definitely see people who try the elimination diet, don't actually feel that much better, but retain a sense of sort of restriction and fear around a lot of these foods that were on the no list because they're just not sure. And so this can be really tricky territory, particularly if you have any kind of um, tricky relationship around food and body image and restriction. This can just get into sort of a whole can of worms. So it is a can be a very powerful thing, and I really think it's best done with support. Um, at some point along the way, because the reintroduction phase is a really important phase. The other thing that I will say, and the reason I usually recommend elimination diets as a secondary step, is that what ends up happening when we do an elimination diet, we end up really cleaning up the rest of our diet, right? So when you're cutting out these foods, you're also on the Heal Your Headache diet, for example, you are not having any processed foods. So you've just gone from maybe eating whatever kinds of things to eating almost a totally whole food based diet because you've cut out processed foods from your diet. So there can be these confounding factors where you'll feel better, but we don't really know why you're necessarily feeling better, which is also why it's not a bad idea to kind of think about upgrading your diet generally and getting kind of your ducks in a row there, and then moving on to an elimination diet. Okay, so in defense of chocolate, and I know some of you have chocolate as a trigger, and I am by no means questioning your body knowledge around that by saying this. But chocolate is a little bit of a complicated one, just to show you sort of the complexity of the food piece, because chocolate cravings often occur with our menstrual cycle, which is also a common headache trigger. And chocolate cravings can really frequently be part of that prodrome phase where your headache has actually already been triggered. You're in the prodrome or the lead up to your migraine, and you are craving chocolate as your body's response to try to get more serotonin and sort of dopamine and sort of like raise yourself up, probably. But very easily we can think, okay, well, chocolate caused that migraine. What did I do right before I got the headache? Is have the chocolate. Oh, I'm running late. Okay, I will speed it up, and don't feel bad if you need to leave. That's what I would say. Um, so caffeine, on the other hand, um, does seem to be a little bit of a tricky one, and it's often the one that we feel the most attached to, right? So it's a really tricky one. So but what we know is that for people who experience migraine, even small amounts of caffeine can cause rebound headaches. And we may not be fully aware of the pattern that's happening because we're having caffeine so frequently, and because the rebound headache doesn't happen in sort of direct time, um, in like direct time relationship with the caffeine. So caffeine is one of those things that, if ever and whenever you're ready, I recommend really slowly weaning off of with the support of some extra vitamin C, and then trying to go like 1 month without caffeine and just notice what happens with your headaches if you notice any kind of positive effect there. Okay. I want to check in because I have a few more slides talking about sort of cravings and things, but I can also wrap it up. So Katie, what do you think in terms of timing?
Well, we're over by about 25 minutes, but really 20 minutes because we were running late, and everyone seems to be staying on. So
Okay.
I
Okay.
put our survey on there for people who need to leave, if you wouldn't mind doing the survey quickly. But again, whoever wants to stay on,
Okay, great.
I mean, I'm fine staying on.
Okay. I think I probably have like 3 to 5 more minutes. So maybe I'll
Okay,
just
perfect.
do these really
I mean, I'm
quickly, and
good.
then
So,
I'll hang out. And if people have questions, they can ask them.
okay, great.
Um, so I mentioned this in relation to chocolate, but frequently cravings can happen during the prodrome phase of a migraine. And actually, they can be really powerful messengers because if we can start to tune into them, they can actually help to signal or identify the onset of a migraine attack. And we may be able to cue our abortives earlier, right? Our medication abortives, our ginger, whatever it is that we know that we can do to try to sort of lessen the severity and duration of that oncoming migraine. People also report post migraine hunger and cravings. These are a little bit less well documented, but I can just tell you from having done a bunch of groups that tons of people feel like they crave certain things when they're coming out of their headaches. And a lot of times people aren't able to eat a lot during. So then you have this sort of like bottomless pit of hunger afterwards, and that can often be a really challenging time for people to make healthy choices because you're also in a situation where you're really needing some comfort, because it's been a hard day or 3 days or whatever it's been. So I love to help people get to know their cravings, right? So again, doing a little bit of logging around this and getting curious about when these cravings happen. Is there a give to your cravings? Like, do you always crave salty foods before before your migraine starts, or do you always crave sweet foods? I also think it's a really good idea to honor the spirit of your cravings. So I'm a firm believer that our body is really telling us something and probably asking for something. A salt craving could be related to a little bit of dehydration, right? And salt along with a big glass of water or vegetable juice or something, coconut water is going to really help with that. A sweet craving could be telling us that we have slightly low blood sugar. So, do I think that a pastry is the best answer to that? Maybe not. But you want to sort of honor the spirit of that craving, and maybe you are doing something like I make these power balls with our group that are sun butter or almond butter and some oats, and some like chocolate chips or carob chips and a little bit of honey. And so these can have that sweetness, but also have that complex carb. So it's going to balance your blood sugar levels, but also honor your cravings. And then also self compassion. So, really, sometimes it's okay to find comfort in comforting foods, right? They are a coping strategy, and it's not necessarily a coping strategy that is wrong every time. So, sometimes it's like we make the 80% of our diet look really beautiful. And then that 20% of the time, we're just honoring what it is that our body wants, if that's pizza or, a donut or whatever it is. So we're checking in to see what may have triggered that craving, like what might be underneath it. Did we just walk past a Cinnabon? Are we feeling bored or stressed? Are we actually hungry? Are we maybe in a prodrome phase? Then there are a few strategies you can try, right? So, one strategy is to try to have a small healthy snack first, and then it's still honoring the spirit of your craving. So, if you're craving something crunchy or creamy, you're including that in your healthy snack. And then if you're still wanting a little something 30 or 40 minutes later, it'll be easier to have a smaller amount of that because you will have solved the actual hunger issue there. Combining your treat with a healthy snack. So this is sort of a different take on the first strategy. But maybe you're adding a piece of fruit or dark chocolate, or even a little piece of candy or whatever it is that you're craving to your otherwise balanced snack. And then also you can just try upgrading the quality of your treat. So are you just choosing a higher quality product? Let's say potato chips are your thing and there's no way around it. That is really what you crave. So you look for a potato chip that has good oils, simple ingredients, and you're just making sure that when you're indulging in those things, you have a short ingredient list and those ingredients are as high quality as possible. So here's sort of the self-compassion piece, asking your body what she or he or they are really asking for right now. What is the most loving thing I can do for myself in this moment? And remembering that all life is an experiment. So this is really your body, and no one is the expert of your body except for you, right? So all researchers and clinicians can do is try to sort of collect a body of people's experience, but ultimately your body might not match that experience. So I love for people to just keep in mind that and really feel empowered to do these experiments for yourself and to really listen to what you learn about your own body. So this is just a little recap, and then I'm done. And I'm happy to stay on for questions. And I also understand that we are over time, so you can have my email and get in touch if you need to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
That was great. And yeah, people usually have love-hate relationships with food, right?
So much, so
I
much.
know, I know. And alcohol too. And
Yep.
you had mentioned red wine. There's something called a wine wand. I don't know if anyone's heard of that or tried
Oh,
it. It's called a wine wand, and you put it, you stir it in your wine, and it's supposed to take out the histamines in wine.
very
And
cool.
so it helps people that cannot drink wine, that have migraine. It makes them able to drink it. So you can check that out too, and try it out. But I appreciate, I'm trying to see, someone asked how they join your group. So her email is on there. I guess you have a group as well. Do you have a
Oh,
group, like an online group?
oh, you know what? I don't, but sorry, I was referring to the migraine group that Dr. Bernstein runs, Dr. Bernstein and Meredith run at the Osher Clinical Center for Integrative Medicine. So that is, so you would get in touch with the Osher Center to learn more about that group. And I don't think that it's happening in person right this minute, but I know that there are plans in the works
Okay.
for it. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Perfect. Well, so I put on on the web, on the chat section, our survey. If you would not mind filling out our survey, I